Alright, so this is presentation 2 for Unit 2, and this we're looking at Alexander the Great and the rise of Hellenistic culture. The last thing we talked about was the rise of the Golden Age in Athens. So after the Peloponnesian War and the Athenians were defeated by the Spartans, that ended the Golden Age in Greece for Athens, and then the next big conqueror is Alexander. So getting a little bit about where Alexander was from, he was from this place called Macedonia, and it's just to the north of Greece. And Macedonia is very mountainous. There's a lot of villages and stuff like that there, and they really liked Greek culture. So they loved, the Greek plays, drama, comedies, art, things like that. And they really saw themselves as Greeks, but the Greeks never saw the Macedonians as Greeks, and so the Macedonians always felt looked down upon, as if they weren't good enough. And so some of the leaders of Macedonia wanted to take over Greece and unify it all together, Macedonia and Greece together, as all one empire. So then you get to Philip II. Philip II was the father of Alexander the Great, and he became king at the age of 23, and then he used the phalanx, which we talked about before, the military organization, and he used it in 16 by 16 squares, but he added something else to it. He added the cavalry. And so think of the phalanx going into the enemy's army and basically disorganize it, and then the cavalry could come in behind it and kill everybody else as the enemy is disorganized. So basically, you have the tanks coming in. Basically, the tanks is the phalanx, and they disorganize everything, and then the horses come in really fast and trample over everybody else and kill the rest. And so that's how he's able to basically organize and get to the point where he's ready to invade Greece. So he's got this army ready to go. Now, most people in Greece really looked down on the Macedonians and didn't think they were capable of taking it over. But there was one smart Greek, Demosthenes. And Demosthenes, who was trying to warn the Greek city-states, said, hey, we need to fight this guy. Like, he's crazy. He's got a big military. Like, he could defeat us, but no one listened to him. So you get to the Battle of Chaeronea, and that's where the Greeks lose their freedom and independence to Philip II, and he takes over Greece. Now, during this time, Philip II is also about ready to attack the Persian Empire, which the Persian Empire is the most powerful empire at this point in history. And so before that, though, his daughter is getting married. So he attends the marriage of his daughter at the same time celebrating his conquest of Greece, and this is where he gets murdered. So one of his bodyguards snuck up behind Philip II as he was watching a play and stabbed him in the back. As far as why this was done and what the motive was, we're still not sure, even after 2,000 years. It could have been Alexander the Great trying to get power. The only issue is that with their kingdom, the son did not automatically become king. So Alexander still had to prove that he was the worthy one to be the leader of the Macedonians. And so Alexander was able to prove that. He became king after his father was murdered at the age of 20. And then Alexander the Great just goes on a killing spree. So his first enemy is Persia. So getting into this, Alexander first off is highly intelligent. His teacher was Aristotle. Aristotle is one of the most amazing teachers and philosophers of all of world history, and that's his personal tutor. And then his hero is Achilles, which you've read probably in Greek mythology about. He's in the Iliad. And Achilles, in the story, is immortal except for his Achilles. Is the only place where he could be killed if he got hit in the Achilles. But Alexander wanted to be like Achilles, and so that was his dream, to be immortalized. And the only way to be immortal is to be able to be remembered throughout history. And so by essence, really, us having this lesson and me even talking about Alexander the Great was his life goal. He wanted people for the rest of history to be speaking and talking about him and remembering his greatness. And so he loved that book so much. He desired to be Achilles so much they actually kept a copy of the Iliad in his pillow at all times as he traveled on the battlefield. All right, after he took Greece, the city of Thebes, they rebelled, and to show an example of Thebes and make sure no one else did it, he killed 6,000 people and enslaved all the women and children, and strike fear into the people so they wouldn't rebel again anywhere else. And then he attacks Persia, 334 BC. He goes into Persia, attacks them. Alexander has 35,000 troops. Persians only have 40,000, so they're outnumbered by 5,000. But Alexander was a very different type of king. Most kings back then, they didn't actually fight with their soldiers. They would look from a hilltop and just look on as their soldiers fought for them. But Alexander was on horseback, and he was at the front of his military leading them into battle. And so think about how much more excited they are going to be to go into battle when they see their leader, their king in front, right there, fighting there with them, and so they're going to fight much harder for their king because of that. Whereas in Darius III, who is the king of the Persian Empire, he's sitting back watching these guys fight for him, and he has really no loyalty between he and the men. So Darius loses that first battle to Alexander. So now you get to the second battle at Issus. Here, Darius III has 50 to 75,000 troops. Alexander has around 40,000. Alexander still absolutely annihilates Darius III in this battle again. And a lot of it, again, goes back to the fact that the men are going to be loyal to Alexander. Also, too, another thing that's going to make Darius III's men not that loyal is the fact that they're conscripted fighters. That means they're paid fighters. Now, think about it. If you're getting paid to fight, are you going to fight that hard if you need to get paid? Well, no, because you don't get paid if you're dead. So you're going to fight just hard enough to survive, but not hard enough in order to actually win the battle. So that's another reason why they're going to lose to Alexander's men, because Alexander's men are fighting for their king. All right, so Darius III, finding himself in a position where he can't defeat this guy, he offers a third of the Persian Empire to Alexander, which is just ridiculous because Alexander obviously knows that Darius feels defeated. If he's offering a third of his empire, obviously he's scared. So why would you just take a third? I mean, take the whole thing. Go ahead and kill him and his military and take the empire. So Alexander, he marches into Egypt, which was part of the Persian Empire at the time. They really hated the Persians. And so the Egyptians saw Alexander as a liberator, so they just welcomed him in. So automatically, they made him pharaoh. I mean, think about that they're willing to welcome him in and immediately make him half god, because the Egyptians, of course, believed Pharaoh was half god. And so Alexander walks right in, becomes pharaoh, and starts the city of Alexandria, which is still a major city today in Egypt. And then now he goes back to Persia now. So you get to the Battle of Gaugamela. Here, Darius III had 250,000 men. So this is the last battle for the Persians. He gets everybody together that he can get. I mean, think about it. That's like the city of Arlington, everybody in it fighting. Alexander wins this battle again, even though he's outnumbered, and destroys the Persian military for good. From this point on, he's just able to walk in from city to city and take all their wealth and everything. So he topples the Persian Empire. All right, so other conquests after that. Alexander's downfall, though, so he's really good at conquering. He was not good at controlling, so he wasn't good at setting up a government and actually governing his people. So he never set up who was going to be his successor after he died, because he didn't have any kids. And so, there wasn't a way, again, to decide this, and there wasn't a way to organize his vast empire, who's going to control what parts. So Alexander was more focused on trying to kill Darius. That was like his focus, was I just need to find Darius and slit his throat. So he keeps looking for Darius, finally found him, but Darius was actually killed by his own men, probably because Darius was willing to give up part of the empire, and they really didn't feel like he was loyal, so he was murdered by his own men. So Alexander continued to march. He went 200 miles past the Indus Valley in India. So in total, over an 11-year period, he and his men had marched 11,000 miles, conquering and creating really the biggest empire up to that point in history. And then he went back to Babylon, which is present-day Iraq, and that's where he started to try to rule his empire, but then he became very sick, and he died at the age of 33. All right, so this is what his empire looked like. So you can see it started in Macedonia, went down to Greece, and then he started attacking the Persian Empire, and then went back to Egypt, got it, and went back to the Persian Empire, conquered all of the Persian Empire, all the way to India. So these are like present-day countries of India: Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Israel, Egypt, Turkey, Greece, Macedonia, Albania. So that's a huge area that he controlled. Now you get to his legacy. So after he died, his empire was divided among his 3 best generals. But of course, they're not going to be happy just having a third of the empire. Each general wants to control the whole thing. So you have Antigonus, he gets Macedonia. Ptolemy got Egypt. And Seleucus got the Seleucid Empire. So all 3 fight each other over control. So this empire isn't going to last very long, because eventually, very soon after, the city of Rome is going to begin expanding and start forming the Roman Empire. All right, so Hellenistic culture. So just anytime an army advances and takes over large areas, you're going to have new cultures come about, because a people group that lived in India is now interacting with a people group that lives in the Persian area, and then they're also interacting with the Egyptians and the Greeks. So now you're going to get this new culture. So Hellenistic culture is a blend of Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian cultures. And then you get the language of Koine. Koine was also a combination of Greek and the other languages that came together. Kind of think of like Spanish in Texas. Texas. Spanish in Texas is mixed with English, creating basically Spanglish, which is not truly Spanish, not English. It's just kind of this in-between language. Then Alexandria, the city of Alexandria, became the most important city of this time. Think of it as like the New York City of that time period. So if you wanted to be anything, do anything, you went to Alexandria. It was very advanced for that time period. It had a major, like a main street with shopping centers and stuff like that, like you would see in Fifth Avenue, New York. Also had a major zoo, a huge museum, and also had one of the wonders of the world, the Pharaoh's Lighthouse, which you can see that model in the picture there. The Pharaoh's Lighthouse was 400 feet tall. And what we still don't know is how they actually lit it. How were they able to get a beam of light shooting out over into the ocean 2 or 3 miles? And then how did they fuel the fire? Since they're in the desert, it's not like you have wood sitting around, so how do you keep the fire going? Like I said, a huge museum and library in the area as well. And then they made some huge advancements in science and technology. So Aristarchus, he estimated that the sun was 300 times the size of the Earth. He was at least going in the right direction. The sun is much bigger than the Earth, but the sun is actually 1.4 million times the size of the Earth. But at least he realized that it was bigger. Ptolemy, he believed the Earth was the center of the solar system. This was a belief that went on for the next 1,400 years until about 500 years ago when we realized the sun was the center of the solar system and the Earth goes around it. Then Eratosthenes, he actually calculated the circumference of the Earth at 24,662 miles. He was 198 miles short, and he did that by just with a stick and measuring the shadow every day at noon. So he would measure the shadow at noon from the stick, walk, let's say 5 miles south. At noon the next day, he'd do the exact same thing. Put the stick down, measure the shadow, and see how much that changed, and he was able to use that ratio and mathematically figure out how big the Earth was. But notice that they didn't think the Earth was flat. So this is 2,200 years ago. They thought the Earth was round. And then math, Euclid, he came up with geometry. So pretty much geometry you study today is the book, The Elements, that Euclid created 2,300 years ago. Then Archimedes, he came up with pi, 3.14, and invented the compound pulley, so now we could lift heavy things. And then in philosophy and art, you get the Stoics. They believed that there was a divine power, so there was a God, and so we should live a good life. Then you get Epicureanism. They believed that we were made up of atoms. They also believed that there were gods that created everything, but they didn't care about us. And they cared more about finding harmony. So basically, you're starting to see Indian influence. So they believe in the idea of trying to reach enlightenment and things like that. So you're starting to see Hinduism reach its way to Europe. And then art starts to turn to realism. So in the classical period, the Greeks, they showed the body as like the ideal version of it, super muscular and toned and all that. Whereas now you're getting to realism, so that they want to show what life is really like. And so they really focus on the emotions of the face, but they don't try to make people look better than what they really were. So by 150 BC, Hellenistic culture begins to decline because now the Roman Empire begins to flourish. Roman Empire takes over Hellenistic culture, takes a lot of their ideas, and they use it to create the most powerful empire the earth had ever seen.